Good morning and welcome to Blixx Horses. I'm your host Gabriela Rodriguez, and today we are welcoming back a guest that we've had on several episodes regarding bits versus bitless bridles. And we are welcoming Dr. Robert Cook. Our show today is simply called The Bitless Bridle, the CrossUnder Bitless Bridle, and we have one here on display to show you. So if you can take a look at this bridle, it looks a little bit different, strikingly different, because there is no bit in the horse's mouth. So today for our show, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the research that Dr. Cook has done, his most recent research regarding the use of the bitless bridle. And we are also going to talk about the rules of the FEI and discuss a little bit about what the future holds for competition with the bitless bridle. So Dr. Cook is on Skype today. He's not on set. And I want to welcome you, Dr. Cook, to our show.
Thank you, Gabriela. Yes.
All right. So how would you like to start the show? Do you want to start by talking about the most recent research or the FEI? And we're trying to also, because our audience may be anybody in the professional community, anybody that has anything to do with horses, from riders to trainers, to your pleasure horse owners that do a little bit of competition, or are Olympic level riders.
Well, I think, let's not even mention the word FEI at this stage.
Okay.
Let's just focus on simpler matters, not getting into the politics of rule change and so on.
Okay.
Let's just talk about the pleasure horseman and the ability for such people to enjoy riding more thoroughly than they perhaps are now.
And for the horse to enjoy it as well.
Avoiding accidents.
Yeah, and also for the horse to have some enjoyment from the sport of riding as well, right?
Yes. I mean, the whole purpose of riding presumably is for both people, both partners in the in the dyad to enjoy themselves, the rider and the horse. That's the secret of having a harmonious partnership.
From all the research that you have recently done, what are the most important things that you would like all riders to understand?
The amount of pain that the bit causes, whether the rider recognizes this or not, the bit is far more. The horse is so sensitive. I think this is the problem. We don't give the horse sufficient credit for the degree of sensitivity that it has, and even though a rider may not think that they are applying sufficient pressure on the reins to hurt the horse or to upset the horse in any way, the horse does notice. The horse is so sensitive. So we have to recognize that even though we, the rider, feel that we should be able to put a metal rod in a horse's mouth without without hurting the horse, and we maintain that we have good hands, the horse does notice. The horse recognizes the problem that the horse has, not the one that you have. And so the sensitivity of the horse to pain, basically the problem is that back in the Bronze Age, we, mankind, made a mistake. We put a metal bit in a horse's mouth, and we should never have done that. It was impertinent on our parts. At the time, it seemed a logical and perhaps justifiable thing to do. And in those days, welfare of the horse was not in our minds. But things have changed, and the horse is still as sensitive as it was in the Bronze Age. And the the problem is that we should not ever use force of any sort to communicate. Any attempt to coerce the horse is a huge mistake.
And I want to also add that even the riders who claim to have the best of hands, the softest hands, any movement by the horse on his own will cause pain from the bit.
Yes, yes. The horse notices every small movement in its mouth and any small movement of the horse's reins. An interesting discovery made by a good friend of mine in New Zealand, Dr. Fridtjof Hansen, when he was first discovering and exploring Bitless riding and comparing his own horse when he was riding both with and then without a bit. He used a voice recorder on the horse's nose, strapped over the noseband, to record the horse's breath sounds. And he realized that when the horse was bitted, the very slightest movement of his hands, and he is a very, very good rider, even the slightest movement of his hands resulted in a hesitation in the horse's breathing, and from that also a hesitation in the horse's striding, because the horse breathes in synchrony with the movement of its legs, one breath and one stride. So the voice recorder allowed him to recognize this immediate interference, even though he was not using force or pressure and was riding with a loose rein. Even that was not enough to prevent the horse from recognizing movement.
And can I also add, for those who don't know, that horses do not breathe from their mouths?
No, the horse is what is called an obligate nose breather. It's not that they prefer to breathe through the nose, they cannot breathe through the mouth. And two of the things that have come out of the research I've done in the last 20 years. First, a horse runs with closed lips. Mm-hmm. Second, when it's running, certainly at speed, it needs to extend its head and neck. So any horse that has an open mouth or the lips are not sealed is a horse that is not going to be able to breathe freely. Any horse that is restrained in its head-neck position in any way will not be able to stride properly, because the horse uses its head and neck as a pendulum, and it's an important energy-saving mechanism. The head bob allows the horse to move its limbs without expending unnecessary amounts of energy. It economizes on the work of striding and also on the work of breathing. So horses that are not permitted to have that unrestrained head bob will get tired more rapidly, and because they're tired, now they're more likely to stumble, and certainly when it comes to racing, they're more likely to fall, break a leg because they fall, and so on. There's a whole cascade of problems and catastrophes that follow because the horse is not able and doesn't have the freedom of its head. So those two things, yes.
And I want to share with our audience, or to remind everyone, we just had a very big competition, the Rolex competition recently. And the Kentucky Derby is next Saturday. So I'm hoping that people watch the horses, not only watch the horses run, but watch the mechanics and watch their mouths while they are running. Because in my experience as an equestrian, I have seen horses ridden with their mouths open regularly.
Yes, indeed. And in fact, even when the mouth appears to be closed, and a rider will insist that the lips, the mouth is not gaping anyway, the problem is that the horse needs to have a negative pressure in its mouth when running. It needs to have a vacuum. The lips need to be sealed. And the presence of a bit breaks that seal. You only need a pinhole to break the seal of the lips. And certainly one bit and even worse, 2 bits, and in racing 2 bits and a tongue tie, they prevent the horse from developing that necessary vacuum in the mouth, and therefore the vacuum in the back of the throat, which clamps the soft palate down onto the root of the tongue and ensures that the airway in the throat is free for breathing. So coming back to the research that I wanted to focus on, rather than this more recent work about the vacuum in the horse's mouth, the riders over the years have completed a questionnaire that I generated, and they documented the behavior of their horse both when bitted and then after having switched to the CrossUnder bridle. The questionnaire was a very extensive one, and I was able to count up the number of fear responses that the horse showed when bitted and compared that with the number of fear responses, behavioral responses that the horse showed, that same horse showed when bitless. And the numbers are really very striking. Just to give you the summary numbers, when a horse was bitted, and we're talking about 66 horses, these were 66 questionnaires that were suitable and properly filled in, and I could analyze. The median number of fear responses that these horses showed when bitted was 23 behavioral responses, 23 unwanted behaviors. When that same group of horses was ridden bitless, the median number of responses was down to 3. And that was as a result of riding bitless for a period of about 30 days, just over a month. So within a month, the number of fear responses, the number of unwanted behaviors was reduced from 23 to 3. And some of these horses had been, their questionnaire, the riders had filled in their questionnaires very soon after switching to a CrossUnder bridle. Some of them switched on day 1. Others took more time before they filled in the questionnaire a second time. So what I'm saying is that had every rider taken, shall we say, 2 months before filling in the questionnaire a second time, the figures would have been even more impressive. But even so, these figures are extraordinarily compelling. The total number of unwanted behaviors in the population, in this particular population of 66 horses, the total number of unwanted behaviors when bitted was, in round figures, 1,500. When bitless, the total number of unwanted behaviors was 200. It was reduced from 1,500 to 200. That, in just mathematical terms, represents an 87% improvement in fear responses, and therefore an improvement in behavior of the horse, an increased likelihood of safety, and a reduction of accidents. The actual 69 fear responses I've listed in chronological order, depending on the frequency of the problem. The first and the most common problem was a horse that hated the bit, that was chomping and chewing and fussing with its mouth and showing nervousness and apprehensiveness and so on. So that was the most commonly documented fear response. But fright, with the capital letters, really was the second, and combined with that, really. A bit makes a horse nervous. It makes makes a horse more likely to spook and to be highly strung, and more likely to do a number of other things like buck and bolt. So fright was the second most common problem. The third most common one was a stiff neck. And this brings me back to what I was saying about the importance of the head bob. The horse was unable to move its head freely because of the restraint of the bit and the pain that the bit was causing. So the horse was now no longer using its head and neck as an athlete should be able to do. Think of how a human athlete would protest if you required the athlete to perform in the Olympics or any other sort of competition with a plaster cast around her neck. She couldn't do it.
And can I also just remind people that anatomically, if you compare our mouths to a human mouth to a mouth of a horse, the bit traditionally has fit in the area where there are teeth lacking in the horse. In the human, if we take out teeth and put a metal bar on the gums, anatomically all of that is similar. And a lot of people don't know that, correct?
Correct. The gap in a horse's mouth was not put there by evolution for our convenience. It was there for quite different evolutionary purposes. And we had no business taking advantage of an apparent invitation on the part of the horse to slip something in between its the incisor teeth and the cheek teeth. If you try to put a metal rod in a dog's mouth, you'll realize that the dog will react far differently from a horse. The fact that the horse doesn't protest in the same way that the dog does is much to the credit of the horse, but it shouldn't be assumed that the horse hasn't noticed it and that the horse is willing to tolerate it. The horse is not. If that bit wasn't strapped in the horse's mouth, the horse would certainly immediately allow it to fall out.
Yes.
It's only because it's strapped in that it stays there.
And can I go ahead?
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, I was just saying the dog is a good example, but a cat would be an even better example. A cat would not let you get anywhere near the cat a second time if you tried to put a metal rod in its mouth when it was fully conscious. It would be climbing up the curtains.
Yes. And one other point that I want to make, because I have found with my experience with people and helping them understand horses, that they don't know or understand or were ever told that horses as prey animals are stoic by nature.
Yes.
And their
Yes.
stoicism leads people to believe that they feel nothing. And that's extraordinarily wrong.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And Gabriella, thank you for speaking slowly as you're now doing. And the viewers may not realize that I've asked you to do that because we're having problems with the sound at my end and I'm having difficulty hearing what you're saying. But I think now that we've got warmed up a little bit, you could probably go back to your normal speech. And
I like this better.
yes, yes, I'm sure you do. I can feel you being restrained like a horse with a bit in its mouth.
The point that I was trying to make so people understand, they often fail to remember that as prey animals,
Yes,
horses need to be quiet and need to be stoic because otherwise, in the wild, they would be discovered.
yes,
And their job is to survive. So because a horse is stoic and doesn't show necessarily a reaction the way or a dog or a cat would show, does not mean that the horse is not in pain.
no, no, indeed. And the other point which follows on from what you've just been saying, um, viewers might just remind themselves frequently of the behavior of the wild horses that they see on videos and ones that they've seen themselves perhaps at Chincoteague or Assateague and other places, Nevada and so on. If you watch a herd of wild horses, they are essentially peaceful animals. They don't do a lot. There's nothing very dramatic about the scene. They
Yeah.
are extraordinarily peaceful, and that's what their preference is. They're seeking comfort, and they don't expend any energy more than absolutely required. They've got it there. We know they're powerful and amazingly capable of tremendous speed, but their preference is to have a quiet life. And if we allow them to, and as long as we don't aggravate them, that's their default behavior. So if somebody maintains that they have a highly strung horse and, oh yes, he's a nervous animal, they should ask themselves, what is making that horse so nervous?
Yes. And my other thought was
I
that
shouldn't, excuse me, I shouldn't have said what. They should have asked themselves, who is
who?
making their horse so
No.
nervous?
Yes. My other thought, something also that people fail to realize, is that within the horse community and the horse world, people are sort of indoctrinated to enjoy that drama. And the
Yes,
drama is not a part of the horse.
no,
Horses don't have the drama. We are the ones that say that we enjoy that. And so it's purely
yes.
for entertainment that
Yes.
this occurs.
In recent years, the trend in dressage, you're right, using the word drama there, I think I'm right in saying that there's been a trend for judges to reward a sense of drama,
Yes.
to make it a more, shall we say, popular sport for the spectator.
Yes.
So this tension and constrained nervousness on the part of the horse is rewarded with added
Ribbons.
points, which is not how it should be at all. Dressage should be a peaceful occupation.
Yes. And also, I think people fail to realize that with a lessened drama, lessened nervousness, there's higher performance on the part of the horse, better performance, because they are not being restrained.
Oh, indeed, yes. The performance will improve, and if the idea of causing a horse no pain doesn't appeal to anybody, and I can't imagine that it doesn't appeal to any rider. All riders love their horses and would certainly applaud and agree that it's a good idea not to cause their horse pain. But now I've lost the thread of what I was wanting to say there. The horse being so sensitive requires peace and quiet, and if we avoid hurting the horse, there's a much reduced chance that the horse will hurt us. That might appeal. And now, picking up the thread that I meant to also talk about, this question of performance. Yes, the idea that a horse will perform better certainly is an attraction to those people who compete, but also to those people who are just interested in going for a happy trail ride. Lack of pain will give better performance. Less pain, better performance. Less pain, more comfort. And more comfort, less risk.
Yes.
So to reduce the risk of riding, remove the bit from a horse's mouth. The bit is unnecessary. We've grown up and been, shall we say, brainwashed by tradition into thinking that the bit is necessary to control a horse. That is a myth that we have to strive hard to deny, forget, and expunge from our minds. A bit does not control a horse. In this population that I've been studying of 66 horses, none of those horses, none of the riders that were filling in the questionnaires, none of them reported when the horse was bitless that they had lost control. They had more control.
Yes.
So this, again, was a number which was pretty impressive. The fact that the sensitivity of control, once you've removed the bit, was far better. The bit produces noise in the signal. If it's accompanied by pain, the pain is a bit like audio noise, a signal that contains far too much interference. And so if you remove the noise, you remove the pain, the horse can now hear what you're trying to say. The horse is having the same problem with the bit in its mouth that you and I are having problem with the audio on this video.
Right.
But if you remove the pain, now the horse can focus and can listen and can relax and can learn. If you're trying to train a horse, you will find that the horse will learn so much more rapidly without a bit in its mouth. And so you'll generate far fewer problems for yourself as a trainer by partnering with your horse and avoiding hurting him.
Yes. I wanted to mention something or say something about the research that you just did on the 66 horses. And there were some that did not positively respond to the use of the bitless bridle. And I wanted to say that there are many reasons why something like that would happen. A horse could be sick. A horse could have Lyme disease. A horse could be lame. There are many reasons why a horse would not have responded positively to the use of the bitless bridle on in another circumstance.
Well, I agree absolutely, Gabriella, with what you're saying. However, let me again give you another consequence or a result from the 66 horse population that I studied, the number of pain responses was hugely reduced just by removing the bit. These horses may or may not have had some other problems. They may or may not have had, for example, things like Lyme disease, and they might have had other problems with their feet, and they may have had pain in their legs and so on. What I found was that, nevertheless, by just removing one particular pain, the bit, the horse was hugely improved. And so the conclusion that I draw from that is that the bit was by far the most frequent, most common cause of pain.
Yes.
And so if in doubt, and your horse, if you think your horse has other problems, certainly you should do something about it. But first remove the bit. Yes.
Yes, I think that's important. And because with my organization, we're very conscious of anything that might hurt a horse or impede the performance. And we're also conscious of the fact that we have, this is getting off the subject just a little bit, but we have a tremendous population of unwanted horses in this country. And one of the things that I find to cause that is safety. When a rider falls off or when a rider has a poor performance, one of the first things that they think about is to sell their horse or to get rid of their horse, particularly if there has been a problem or the horse to them is, quote, dangerous.
Yes, indeed. You've raised a very good point there, Gabriella, and I'm glad you have done. Wastage in the horse is huge, and much of it is caused by unwanted behavior. Riders, understandably, become scared of riding their own horses, and it's really a tragic situation, because the horse's life may be terminated. Certainly, the horse may be sold on and degraded in some way, and or euthanized. So there's a huge wastage, emotional wastage, but economic wastage too. The expense of keeping a horse is hugely increased by using a bit that shortens a horse's life and renders a horse less attractive to the owner, less useful.
Yes. And unfortunately, I believe that a great percentage of these horses that are deemed to be dangerous or naughty or uncooperative or any of the number of terms that people use has to do with one thing, and that is the fact that they are in pain.
Yes, the horse in this group of horses that I've studied, the 66 horses, the horse that had the most number of unwanted behaviors was a very talented horse, an event horse. It had 51 unwanted behaviors when bitted, and after a period of careful training, Bitless, it had none. It took 2 years for that to happen, but there was improvement in the first 3 months, certainly compelling improvement to encourage the owner to continue with the Bitless program.
Yes.
But that was a horse that was, as you say, dangerous to ride.
Right. The other part of this, as with anything, when you have your information and it is from a source like yourself, it's important to make a commitment to change and not just try something and go back to the same thing.
Indeed, yes.
And
yes.
it could take a few weeks, it could take a few months, but you really need to make that commitment to your horse. understanding this documented information. And I also want to add, because I didn't mention this before to those viewers who don't know who you are not only a professor, you have been a veterinarian, and you were also a writer at one point. So you have that
Yes,
experience
I
of
was, yes.
using a bit, as
The
do I.
the point I'd like to add to what you've already said, and I agree with, a rider that is considering change should remember and be encouraged by the fact that if they remove the bit and they use a bitless bridle, they will see some improvement on day one. To encourage them. And many people, as I've said, even completed the questionnaire on day one. They were so delighted with the improvement that they see. So what I'm saying is, yes, you will see continued improvement over a period of time, after, say, a month and then 2 months, and possibly in a horse that was badly traumatized, after a year or even 2 years. But the wonderful thing is that the horse is so forgiving and so compliant, shall we say, and eager to please, bless them, that you will see, you will be encouraged even on day one.
Yes.
And you shouldn't hesitate to try. And try it in a small arena, a small paddock, a safe area, perhaps. Certainly, that makes good horsemanship sense. But you are still far safer. And if you don't have a bitless bridle, just take a halter and add a couple of add a pair of reins to a halter. Go out in an arena or a small paddock in a safe place, and just see how your horse behaves without a bit in its mouth. The horse will tell you how much more comfortable he or she is.
Yes.
Immediately.
I also want to add, and this is, I think, very important for the average rider, which is not an Olympic level rider, the average pleasure rider or a rider in lower level competitions, whether they be dressage or jumping, as I did, that you need to continue using the bitless bridle in order to understand and get a feel for it and not be afraid of it, because in my findings, it's not the horse that doesn't want the bitless bridle, it's the rider. And in many cases, it's the trainer afraid of changing.
Yes.
What would you say to the vast majority of trainers, which most people have, to help them with competition and with riding? Why do you think that the majority of trainers do not want to be open-minded to the use of the bitless bridle?
It's a very good question. I think by definition, a trainer probably, or most trainers, are focused on competition, and because they're focused on competition, they realize that bits are mandated by competition rules. And so their livelihood depends on working with people who wish to compete, and they know that they have to use a bit for that purpose. But the trainer has also grown up in a world in which bits are accepted as appropriate for horsemanship, and that's also a problem for the trainer, as it is for every rider. They have a built-in fear of dispensing with the bit, and the best advice that I could give such a trainer is to simply try it, and you're far less likely to get into trouble and to be run away with if you take the bit out of the mouth. The bit is the most common cause of a horse bolting, the most common cause, in my experience, of a horse bucking, the most common cause of a horse rearing. All these very dangerous fear responses on the part of the horse, they're most commonly caused by the bit.
Yes, and I wanted to add one thing for anybody who may be watching, who competed as I did in lower level competitions, who was a pleasure rider, that it's important to be an advocate for your horse. If you truly care for your horse, then whatever your trainer says, you need to think carefully about if it's something that may not be in your horse's best interest. If you want to have a long-term successful relationship, whether it be just pleasure riding or in competition, you need to do your own research. And I also want to add that in a lot of these very much lower level competitions in which I participated, you can use the bitless bridle, which I did. You simply have to talk to the steward and let them know that you are entering your horse without a bit. And to be very honest, I took great pride in that when I was competing, because I was able to show that my horse did not have a bit in his mouth. And even if I didn't get that blue ribbon, my horse, his way of moving and his ability to have control of his head, when I saw pictures or videos, it was very, very beautiful compared to the look of the horses that were pulled in and restrained with the use of the bits. The look in their eyes could tell you that they were extremely uncomfortable.
Can I chip in there again and support what you've just said, and make the point, which I haven't yet made? Of the 69 fear responses that I've documented and counted, analyzed statistically, and incidentally, the statistics were very compelling. The great majority, 99% of those 69 pain indices, all but one, in fact, affected the gait, affected the way of going of a horse. So what I've done is to propose another term to describe the signs of bittedness, and we should speak of a horse that is bit lame.
Bit lame.
Many riders are familiar, anecdotally perhaps, with the phrase bridle lame, but what I'm now saying is that bit lameness, abnormal gaits caused by the presence of a metal foreign body in a horse's mouth, is far more common than foot lameness, for example. We shall find in due course, when the numbers are generated and discovered, bit lameness is a hugely common syndrome. It's you see so many, so all of these 68 of these 69 fear responses were in fact lamenesses of a sort. Abnormal movement. So we should focus and name it for what it is. And until you remove the bit, you won't even recognize that your horse was lame. But Gabriella, you were absolutely right when you saw the difference in the way your horse moved once you'd taken the bit out of its mouth.
Yes, and the horse that I'm talking about is a thoroughbred horse that raced until he was 10. And so he was taught to try to win by a nose and stretch his head out. But is it also important, don't you think, for people who have interest in riding or just a love of horses to study them by observing them as they are running in different great gaits freely without a rider or without anything on their heads, so they can understand and study those movements.
Yes, yes. That certainly is a useful exercise. I mean, just watch that horse of your own when you let it free in a paddock and it has a gallop around and is frisking and playing and dancing and doing all sorts of complicated dressage movements which you are unable to do once you get in the saddle. The horse
Yes.
becomes essentially a cripple and
Yes.
is incapable of any of these delightful rhythmic movements.
Yes.
But on its own, without a bit in its mouth, that same horse moves beautifully.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to have to close the show, but before I do, I want to make sure that if anybody is interested in the research that you did, where can they find it?
Well, they can find it on a website. This is not my website any longer. It's one that I generated and compiled whilst I was promoting the Bitless bridle, the CrossUnder bridle, but I've sold my company and it's now owned by a group of people in Colorado who are still manufacturing the bridle and using the same, they're still using the same website. So the articles that I've written and so on are available still on their website. This is the PHS website. And the domain name is www.bitlessbridle.com. This is the same domain name that I had myself when I was still owner of a company, but I'm no longer an owner of a company. I'm not trying to sell anyone any bridles. So there is that. Sorry about my telephone here. I'll try to silence it.
So we'll just hold
dear,
for just
I
a
can't.
second. Okay.
If anybody should wish to email me, my email address now is bob.cook, bob.cook, at tufts.edu. That's the name of Tufts University, TUFTS, tufts.edu. So bob.cook at tufts.edu, all lowercase letters.
Yes, and I also...
My telephone number is 443-282-0472.
Thank you for all that information. I wanted to make sure that the viewers know that this is a beta black bitless bridle that we have on the mannequin here. And I also need to say that you are the developer of this CrossUnder bitless bridle, and I have a tremendous amount of pride of being on this show with you, to be able to try and help people have more information so that they can have a better relationship with their horse and to open their minds to another way of riding that is a very peaceful way to ride.
Yes, indeed. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my research, Gabriella.
Thank you very much, and the shows will be uploaded to YouTube. And if anybody has any interest in discussing this, they can talk to you. The information about the bitless bridle and the fitting is very detailed, and there are scores and lots of information that people can get. So I encourage the viewers to do that. And we're signing off. Thank you very much, Dr. Cook, for taking the time to do this. Thank you to our producers for your patience with the show. And I want to say goodbye. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.